for a treat. These are three amazing authors, three amazing books, and I'll just start talking about them. So Minrose Gwin is the author of the novels The Queen of Palmyra, Promise, The Accidentals, and Beautiful Dreamers. She has also published a memoir, Wishing for Snow, about the collision of poetry and psychosis in her mother's life, and 4 books of literary and cultural criticism, most recently Remembering Medgar Evers, writing the long civil rights movement. Like the characters in her novels, Gwin is a native of Mississippi. She lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Kimberly Brock is the best-selling author of The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare, which was shortlisted for the prestigious Townsend Prize for Fiction, The River Witch, recipient of the Georgia Author of the Year Award, and The Fabled Earth, which is the one we're talking about today. She is the founder of Tinderbox Writers Workshop and has served as a guest lecturer for many regional and national writing workshops. A native of North Georgia, she now lives near Atlanta. And Robert Gwaltney is the co-host of the Inside Voices podcast with Jeffrey Dale Lofton, who is also here, FYI. His debut novel, The Cicada Tree, was awarded the Somerset Award for Literary Fiction. He is 2023 Georgia Author of the Year, the Pat Conroy Literary Center Fall 2022 Writer in Residence, and Vice President of Easterseals North Georgia Incorporated. He also has a new book that was just announced, but I'm going to ask you about that later. So first off, I am going to give y'all an opportunity just to tell us about your books. It can be the slightly longer elevator pitch, if you just start talking and words start coming out. Just tell us about your books.
Can you do that?
Oh,
Start talking and let words come out.
Yeah, oh yeah, maybe. Well, so the Cicada Tree, and I'll just give you my elevator pitch for this. I actually much rather write an entire book than have to summarize a book. I think it's a terrifying question when someone says, what's your book about? So quickly, the Cicada Tree is a work of Southern fiction in the Gothic tradition with elements of magical realism. The summer of 1956, Annalise Newell, an 11-year-old whiskey-drinking piano prodigy, encounters the Mayfield family, a wealthy family possessing a supernatural beauty that others refer to as that Mayfield shine. It's this initial encounter that stirs obsession within young Annalise, setting her down a path of dangerous games and manipulation, all of it culminating in a cataclysmic plague of cicadas. So it's a feel-good book.
Oh, God, now I have to follow that. And as you can see, I don't have it all together like that. So this is a dual timeline historical Southern fiction. It is set on the coast of Georgia. You may know about Cumberland Island. It's our southernmost island. And in the 1880s, the Carnegie family bought property there and built these big Gilded Age winter homes. So by 1932, my first timeline in the novel, they're beginning to crumble. So it's nice and Southern Gothic in that way. The second timeline is 1959. So some social rights stuff is starting to cook a little bit there for that timeline. There are 3 women, and one of them features in both timelines. So in the summer of 1932, Cleo Woodbine is a young woman from southern Appalachia. You hear this accent, right? Who comes to live on the island for the summer, and she is supposed to be watching over the only girl that's there with a party of young men for the summer. And they tell stories around a bonfire one night, and Cleo tells a story that kind of gets away from her, and things go really wrong, and 2 boys drown. So in 1959, the daughter of that other girl, who the woman has died, comes to Cleo asking questions about what happened to her mother in 1932. And then there's a third girl who is running an inn, and she's, you know how 1959, you graduated high school in your wedding dress? So she is already married, this young 19, 20-year-old girl, running an inn in town, and she brings her Brownie camera to town, and she takes pictures around town. And she accidentally develops a double exposure with the face of the boy who hasn't been seen since 1932. And everybody thinks it's a ghost. So there's a lot of folklore and ghost stories, and it's a nice, thick, quiet, slow Southern read. So I say it's a little like barbecue. See, I got you.
That was good.
Oh, boy. Now, this is hard. Okay. My novel is set on the Mississippi Gulf Coast in a little town called Belcote, which is a substitute for Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. And it is narrated by a older person, woman, wildlife biologist named Memory Feather. And Memory tells a story. Her story starts in the 1950s, and she and her mother, Virginia Feather, have moved back to Belcote after Virginia's husband and Memory's father left them high and dry and took up with what the mother calls the French hussy. And so they moved back to Belcote, and Virginia's best friend is Mac McFadden, who is a gay man, and they create this very unusual family, particularly for the 1950s in Mississippi. And they live together. They are a cohesive unit, and they love each other very much, and each one has an emptiness inside him or her, and the others fill that emptiness. And so they get along well as a three-person family unit. Memory also has a disability. She has what she calls her paw. It's a withered hand with two fingers missing. And she also has another characteristic that sets her apart, and that is that she feels that she can hear animals speak to her. So it's 1950s, and so there's a great deal of homophobia, and there's also a great deal of violence against Mac because he is working in the civil rights movement, the burgeoning civil rights movement. They do fine with this as a cohesive unit. But on page 75, a man called Tony Amato comes into the picture, and he's a beautiful, charismatic, seductive man who takes up with Mac and then completely explodes this family unit. So mine is not a feel-good novel, nor is it like barbecue. But it has trouble with a capital T in it, named Tony.
Yep.
Sorry so long. I'm sorry.
No.
That's
I'm
not
sure
an
you all
elevator
just want to
pitch.
go buy their books now and sit down and read.
Oh, good, we're done.
Let's see, where to start? I wanted to start, you all of your books, this is Southern literary fiction, but all of your books take place, at least part of the time, in the 50s and earlier. Can you talk about, how the time period, why you chose it, what it does to tell your story? And anyone can start.
So the 1950s, in my mind, I really felt like it's sort of the last time in American history where there's this perceived sense of innocence. And of course, in Southern Gothic and in the Cicada Tree, there are secrets. In the 1950s, there's this sort of veneer, and you scratch beneath the surface and you find that people and things aren't quite what they seem to be. So for me, I like the idea of the 1950s, and it's a potboiler, really. It's pre-civil rights South, mid-century South, in this particular case, mid-century Georgia, and social and racial oppression, sexual repression. So I think it's just a really good recipe for to help drive a plot forward.
I have the problem of the fact that I'll be 53 in January, and I just forgot what I was going to say. I had it, and now it's gone. So it's funny, we were talking about how my book is not a happy book, and there
Okay,
is
spoiler, none of these are especially
they're not happy books, but there is the appearance of happiness, right? And I think when I think about the South is a folklore to me. It's not true. It's a fiction, and we write about it in all these different ways. And I wanted to write about a time that represented this idea of the good old days, the glory days, and we will give that title to whatever we are nostalgic about. And that particular period of time really, I mean, the 1930s, we have an idea of what that was, but it's a fiction. And the 1950s, it's a fiction. So that part of it metaphorically is there, but there is a historical incident in 1959. So the main house that they built on Cumberland, because they built many, was called Dungeness. And it burned in 1959, that summer, in an arson that was just spectacular. And no one was ever charged with that arson. They think it was poachers on the island. And so I had the fun of being able to speculate a little bit about that. And, to insert the rumblings of what was going on socially in 1959 in this little town that should have been perfect but is not.
When I was reading your book, the narrator or the character who is in both of the timelines, she's been in a remote place, and it said for almost 3 decades. And I was like, wonder why it's almost. Why is it like 28 years? Why is it 20 or whatever it is? And because I am a researcher and librarian, I had to know. So I had to go ahead and spoil it for myself and read all about Cumberland Island and Dungeness. And when I saw that it burned in 1959, I was like, okay, I'm comfortable with knowing why you chose that year now.
And I think that that's really interesting about all of our work, because what you said about a boiling point, and then there's fire.
Yes.
Is a thing, and I'm like, if you're going to write a book of fiction, always burn the house down at the end, right?
That is a great
And so, right, and so, literally, the house burns down at the end. So that was perfect, and it's such a good metaphor. It's such a perfect. You're standing there with the ashes.
And it's very biblical.
Yeah, it's very biblical. We're all coming from the same. We all were boiled in the same pot.
Yes. Well, I can talk about the 50s too, historically, particular, because it's a really interesting period, I think, historically. First of all, in the United States, it's the post-war era, and African American soldiers are coming back from this war that they fought for the freedom of the free world, and looking around in the South. And particularly in my part of the South, in the book, in Mississippi, and seeing that, this looks a little bit like Nazi Germany. Jim Crow looks a little bit like Nazi Germany. So that was happening. Then on top of that, in the country as a whole, there was Senator Joe McCarthy calling out the communists and making up the fact that there were many communists. And then you have President Eisenhower in 1952 or 3 issuing Executive Order 10,450, which barred all homosexual people from working in the federal government. And these people either quit, and most of them did quit, or were fired. And so you have, and then in the middle of the 50s, 1955, you have Emmett Till's murder in Mississippi. And then over in Alabama, you've got Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus. My novel goes from 1953 to to the early 1960s. And that's the timeline of the remembrance of Memory Feather. And then it jumps to the 1980s and in the last chapter. So I think the 50s are just fascinating. They really, really are.
Well, and related to that, what kind of research did y'all do to make sure you weren't, inserting language or accidental, concepts that are too modern, like any anachronisms? What kind of research?
I just made everything up.
You did. Love it.
I did. No, well, I think, it was interesting because there are, their language, the language of the South, especially, when you're talking about racial oppression, that sort of thing, there are terminologies that I think with today's modern reader you have to veer from.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really act, I think you have to sort of reimagine to some degree the Southern vernacular, at least, I wanted to be cautious and very respectful of that. Of course, obviously, the music, fashion, those sorts of things. I wrote within a fictional town because I didn't want any I gotchas. I didn't want to have to be specific. Oh, that's not what Broad Street looks like in Cairo, Georgia. Yeah. So I just created a fictional town. But yeah, I did do some research, music, culture. I actually read Erskine Caldwell in some novels that sort of, were written around that period of time, just for flavor. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big researcher, and that was really sort of my approach.
That's still research.
Yeah,
Actually, my question, what I wrote down was, what kind of research did you do, or did you? So you answered it perfectly by saying you made it all up. Great.
Yeah, and he's so good with language, and you're right. When you say you made it up, you really did. There are words and there are places, and it's all a fiction, but it feels very real.
Thank you.
I admire that about your work. I can't read it while I'm writing, or I copy it.
Well,
Bad.
no,
I won't read it. He'll say, "Here, read this," and I'm like, "No," because I'll just quit.
It's
Because
hard.
so good.
It's hard to read other Southern writers when you're writing your book because their voices will get in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They do. And we write about such similar things, sometimes we'll tell each other what we're writing about because we're worried the other person will say, "Oh, you stole that," because we end up writing the same things. And it's funny because we've not met, and we're going to talk about all of these things that we all wrote that are so similar. So the research thing, I tell people I'm not a historian, I'm a storyteller. So the way I research is like I'm a crow. If it's shiny, I'm excited about it, and I'll read everything I can find about it, and music and art and food, and I kind of immerse myself. I also love to find the internet so fabulous because you can watch interviews with people, and I love like oral storytelling and family histories and family Bibles and those kinds of things to learn language and cadence. And then I do the same thing you do. All of my settings are usually inspired by somewhere real, but fictionalized, because I like to keep that soft focus a little bit so that your reader's very immersed in it. They're not so worried about the detail being exactly right. Mm-hmm. However, if you write about Cumberland Island and you write about the Carnegie family, and there are a shit ton of them, you're trying to keep up with who they all are, and you have to keep up with a lot of little details. So I was very careful just to sprinkle a few very specific details about people who were living or dead that actually existed. They sort of are on the periphery of this book. Most of the people are fictional. And then, your historical events, you have to make sure you're getting those details correct. And I'm a stickler for things like, what would have been in this house? How was this lady cooking or cleaning? What music were they listening to? Was it on the radio at the time? Because, just because it's released in 1959, when? And I'll spend hours down rabbit holes worried about those little details that sometimes don't even make it into the book. But you want to be respectful.
I am. I'm there all the time, so I appreciate.
So I pile up all of this information and all of the stuff that interests me, and then some of it makes it onto the page, but all of it informs the book, I think, and whether you're getting it right or not. And then I also just have to learn to lay down and be okay with the fact that I got it all wrong, because I know I probably did. I'm imagining this. I didn't live in 1932 or 1959, and so that's the hardest part for me, is knowing that in the end, somebody is going to walk up to me and say, you know, and I'm going to say, no, I really didn't. I tried so hard.
And then you can say, you know what, I'm a storyteller.
I'm a
not
storyteller.
historian.
I know, it's
You
such a
just
great
take that out of
cop-out,
your back
right?
pocket.
But it's also what I believe, that you should change. You know, when you read a book or when you write a book, from the time that you work on it until the time that it's finished, or from the time you start reading it to the time it's over, it should change you. You should learn something. So I look at it as a learning experience, and I hope I got most of it right.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Eudora Welty said each book shows you how to write it.
It also shows you how stupid you are.
Yeah,
It does, because I always know I'm not smart enough to write this book while I'm writing it until you get to the end, because it does teach you how to write it.
That's true, that's true. I don't know, did each of you write your books during the pandemic? You know, were you working on them during the pandemic?
Mine actually went out into the world to try to find a publishing home in the midst of the pandemic.
Oh.
My second book, the one before this, actually was on sub. So I had just started to think about this right as the
okay.
pandemic happened and after.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was
Okay.
kind of right in that time.
Yeah. Well, I did a good bit of research. I've spent a lot of time in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, but I did a lot of research at the Hancock County Historical Association Library, and I really. And then I was going to set the book in Bay St. Louis, but the pandemic intervened, and I couldn't finish all the research I wanted to do. And I had, my second book, Promise, was about the Tupelo, Mississippi tornado of 1936, which wiped out half the town. And I felt that every street had to be correct, you know, and even so, just, you know, somebody came up to me when I was doing the event in Tupelo and said, you know, that street was called this back in the day, you know, not that. So you got that wrong. And I thought, I just can't go through that again. So I changed the name. But just what I wanted to say about research was that I love to look at old photographs of the period that I'm working in. And for example, there were some great photographs of the marching band of Hancock County with the majorettes, and my character, Memory Feather, becomes they called her the one-handed majorette in the high school marching band, and I got to see what the costume, you know, what she wore, what they wore, and so forth and so on, so I could describe it in detail, and that was really fun. I really enjoyed that part of it, looking at the photographs and the cars and how the Mississippi Gulf Coast, it didn't have any sand on that part of the beach at all. It just had the breakwater going down, and it had grass and oak trees all the way to the shore, and these big old beautiful hotels that the New Orleanians came, you know, to stay in the summer, and so it was really interesting work to look at those photographs.
You mentioned when you were introducing Memory, which the name alone, Memory Feather, is a fantastic name. Can you talk more about her paw and why you chose to have her have a paw?
Yeah.
And what it means and all that?
Yeah. Well, it has a double meaning to her. I was at Octavia Books in New Orleans a couple of nights ago, and someone asked me about the disability issue and talking about disability in terms of 1950s and in terms of our contemporary days. And that was kind of a balancing act for me. I had to work on it pretty much, and my editors helped me with that. But the paw, her hand, her crippled hand, it means to her two things. First of all, she associates it with the loss of her father. Her father is a brilliant man. He knew all these languages, and he was over in France listening to the communications between East Germany and Russia. And so, because he knew both languages, and so he took up with this French woman and left the family. She associates it with loss, but she also associates it in a positive way. That's a negative way, but in a positive way, she associates it with her affiliation with the non-human animal world and her ability to kind of break through that veil that we feel between non-human animals and ourselves, and so it's two parts. And you know, it's so funny. People ask me why did I choose to do that? You know, I couldn't tell you why I chose it. It just happened on the page. You know, and I'm sure you've had that experience as well. You know, it's just something just happens, and I don't say I'm going to set out to choose this. I didn't. It kind of chose me.
Mm-hmm. Well, similarly, Kimberly, I might be the only person that reads the afterword and the preface and every word of like who it's for and all of that. But you mentioned there's a character in your book, Jimmy, and who it's not exactly clear what's going on with Jimmy. We know he's a little different. But can you talk about how your background and education kind of informed that character?
So it does talk about it, but we didn't have the name for it that exists today in the 50s. So I taught kids with behavior disorders and learning disorders when I was much younger than I am now, before I have my kids. And I had a student who had a condition called Williams syndrome. It's a genetic condition. And she was delightful. I probably learned a lot more from her than she learned from me. She was very fragile and very strong at the same time. The things that made her fragile made her much stronger than me emotionally, I think, and also made her very fragile in ways. And she was an enchanting person, an enchanting human being. And yet there was nothing magical about this child. And I wanted to capture that she was very human. So I have a boy in this book who has Williams syndrome, and it's difficult to write about it because she was so fantastical. Like, that's part of the personality of a person who has Williams syndrome. She's very theatrical, and she was either extremely joyful or extremely sorrowful or everything was extreme. And so when you write about this kid, it feels like a fiction. It feels like you are creating something, a magical creature, and yet not. This person was very real and human, and that's what I struggle back and forth with. So Jimmy's father is a man who is just disappointed in himself as a man. He is not what he thought he was supposed to be. He had his glory days as a football player in town, and now he just works for the paper mill, and he's got a chip on his shoulder about it. His wife dies shortly after Jimmy is born, and now he has a son who who is also not what he thinks he should have, not the kind of boy that should be his son, right? And I thought that that was an interesting thing, a dynamic between these two, because Jimmy is able to express himself and love and be fascinated with the world around him and see the wonder and the magic in the world that his father cannot see, and also experience, deep sorrow for the things that are wrong, the injustices, and he's very accepting of everybody in town, and he loves their movie theater. So I liked putting the two of them together, just to kind of see how they reacted to one another, and it's dramatic, and it's terrible in ways, and then it's also beautiful in ways, what they teach one another. And it's contentious, and it's not resolved. It's trying to understand somebody that's that different from you is difficult, and love them, because you love them, they're yours, but how do you understand one another? And I think that that's at the heart of the book. So I wasn't necessarily trying to write someone with a disability, but I think every character in my book is an outsider. And I knew that about my main characters, and then I realized, this is an atypical person, this is an atypical person, and then I sat down and I looked at it a little closer and realized even the secondary characters, even these people in the background, they're all atypical, because guess what? We all are. And so I think that's a theme for me, and because of the work that I did, that's very much in my mind when I'm writing. And I just thought they were a beautiful pair to inspect and think about.
There is a part where, actually I wrote it down. So it says, she remembered what he'd said about Freddie and music being a good indicator that a man was soulful. She wondered if Glenn, which is Jimmy's dad, Glenn might have benefited had someone ever given him a harmonica. And which is funny, but it also, I was like, what does that remind me of? And it reminds me of the end of A Good Man Is Hard to Find. Did you have that in mind when you were?
I did not have it
Okay.
in mind, but you're right, and I have read that many times.
Well,
so.
if you need a reminder, you should read A Good Man Is Hard to Find. It's classic. But it also deals with like a busybody woman and, a horrible criminal. And what the criminal says, actually his name is the Misfit, sorry for misnaming him as criminal. He says, she would have been a good woman if it had been someone there to shoot her every minute of her life. Anyway, it just reminded me of he could have really benefited from a harmonica, which is a kinder thing than, being shot. But speaking of, cruelty, Robert.
Don't look at me.
You really capture the way that girls and women are particularly cruel to each other. And even though they're both terrible, my favorite characters were Virginia and Miss Minnie Jean. When Miss Minnie Jean comes in, get ready. This is going to be hilarious, and I'm not spoiling anything, but there's a storm at one point, and Miss Minnie Jean's gigantic underpants are at the top of her tree. Anyway, it's just, she's this horrible lady with her panties in a tree. So anyway, can you tell us where these terrible people came from? I don't know, how they came about.
My family.
Are they dead yet? Can you tell us?
Watch out now.
No, I'm only serious.
Being recorded.
Right, no. I think that, the Cicada Tree for me really is a love letter to the Southern women that I've known in my life. My mom, my aunts, my grandmothers, my dear friends, folks like Miss Kimberly Brock here. And now Minrose. No. All of the good things, right? But what I also wanted to show, of course, were those challenging elements of I think Miss Minnie Jean, she's a church organist, and we've all known this woman. And she is sort of a Greek chorus of one, I think. She represents all of that. There are many wonderful things about living in small communities, but there are a lot of challenges with living in small communities. And I think she's very representative of some of the community challenges. She's a busybody. She's not a kind person. I'm drawn, to, of all the characters in this book, I think I want to respect all of my characters. I think I disliked her the most and I understood her the least, in a peculiar sort of way. So I think it was fun. I think we all understand playground politics. We can all remember being children. We can all remember unkindness. We can all remember feeling apart from. So being a child is a long distance back for me. I think that those childhood wounds stay with us.
Yeah,
And
I think that's why it was like painful, but also really fun to observe it without having to live through it. Especially like with Virginia she's just the worst.
Yeah.
She's the worst. I mean, she's not the worst.
No, she's not the
No,
worst.
she's almost the worst.
Yeah, Virginia Fenton's a twin, and her sister is Jane. And Jane Fenton is the protagonist's best friend, and Virginia's just a disaster. And I'll just sort of leave it at that. But it is fun to write. You want that conflict, right? Everyone can't be lovely. But also, one of the things that I want to attempt to do is to sort of live and write in those areas of gray, because not everyone is just one thing. And I think that everyone, unless you're sociopathic or suffer from psychopathy, there's goodness and humanity in everyone.
Can you talk about the role of, there's a lot of music in your book. So can you just talk about like where that came from?
Sure. The lyrical underpinning of the Cicada Tree is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata number 14. I listen to it obsessively. And there are three movements to Moonlight Sonata. There are three acts in the Cicada Tree. The very first movement of Moonlight Sonata, it starts off slow and it gradually builds up until the very end. The cataclysmic plague of cicadas, this frenetic movement of Moonlight Sonata. So I tried to align an act with a movement. Also, I've always been an admirer of people who have something remarkable about them, some remarkable talent. I consider myself to be a failed musician. I took 1 year of piano lessons. My mother still reminds me about all the money she wasted that 1 year. But I was in marching band from 6th grade up through my senior year of high school. So I'm just a lover of music, and it's part of my creative process.
Well, I was interested that there is a major plot point about a particular piece of music that does not exist, right?
Yes.
So was it important to have it be this other thing that we couldn't quite grasp?
So she's referencing Cordelia's sonata, and Cordelia Mayfield is the matriarch of the wealthy Mayfield family. And Cordelia's sonata was an engagement gift given to Cordelia Mayfield by her husband, Kingston Mayfield.
These names are so good.
I love it.
And so Cordelia's Mayfield actually is Moonlight Sonata.
Oh, okay.
And so if if you're kind enough to want to buy and read this book, when Cordelia's sonata is referenced, it's Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata.
Okay.
And there's this element of mystery that happens very early on. Annalise encounters Cordelia Mayfield playing this sonata, and she doesn't know what it means. And by the end of the book, the mystery is unraveled, but there is, a plot underpinning.
What a revelation. I didn't see, I saw maybe one of the things coming, but I didn't see all of them coming. So
Good.
that was an exciting thing. I want to ask all of y'all about plotting and how that happens. And I want to start with you, Minrose, because I don't think I've ever read a more suspenseful non-thriller. Like, I was filled with dread. It's beautiful. I loved it. But there's always a reminder that something bad is going to happen. So can you talk about that? You all are going to talk about it, but I want to start with you.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I find plot for me, I don't know about the other of you, but I found plot the hardest thing. And because I could just describe and describe and describe. I love description, and I could just describe like the Mississippi Sound from now to eternity and create a book out of that. And so what I tend to do is just get my characters in a fix, in what my grandmother used to call a fix. Then I have to figure out how to get them out of it, or how to at least resolve it in a certain way, not neatly. I have a line in the book that says, "Some stories do not tie up their apron strings," and I don't like neat, endings or resolutions. But I do find, that's what happens in my writing process. I'm working on a novel right now that I've got this woman in this terrible situation. She's done something terribly illegal for all the right reasons. And but how do I get her out of this? I mean, how do I get her out of it? And I think that's the work of. That's hard work. I mean, that's, writing is hard work sometimes. I mean, it can be fun, but it is challenging, to create a kind of forward motion of time and suspense. Now, what I do have in the novel that I really love, I love her so much. It's a cat named Minerva. And she's a rather large black cat who Memory hears her speaking to her, and the cat is the one who recognizes that the villain, Tony Amato, is a villain, and everybody better watch out. And the cat is, I think, her better sense of things, although she's very innocent about all of this. Given her age, she starts off at 10 years old, and then by the time Tony comes into the picture, she's about 13 or 14. So, so that's what I would say about plot.
And Kimberly, since you have the dual timelines, how do you plot that out and keep both strands going without them getting all tangled up?
Liquor.
It helps.
Why? Just kidding. I think I just talked about this. First of all, I'm not very good at it. It's very difficult for me, and yet I do it every time. I do it every time, and so you do sit and think, why? Why am I doing this to myself? Why is this the way a story tells itself in my head? Why does it always have to be a dual timeline? Why do there always have to be all of these people, this cast of people? Why can it not be? And I have boiled it down to the fact that I'm Southern. When we tell stories, you don't just tell the straight line story. You start out telling the story, and then you say, but Mama's mama. And you cast back, because if nothing else, we really like to talk about the past in the South, whether we're telling the truth or not. And so I think that's how I learned to tell a story, right? So that's part of my process, is just innate. It's just how you learned to tell a story. I learned to tell a story listening to people around the kitchen table, typically women, after all of the men had gone to do whatever men did, and we would sit and they would talk. And if you were under the kitchen table and they didn't know it, you would hear lots of stories, right? And they always work that way. They're never a straight line story. Ghost stories are always part of that. Your baby stories are always part of that. All of those things. And who's in prison? So all of those kinds of plot things come up for me because they're not a straight line. I know that that's part of why I do it. I usually I have to know the end before I even start. That's how I know where to start. So I almost reverse engineer a book, and some of it works that way. Because if I get to a certain point, I never have writer's block. I always kind of have something that's entertaining my brain. And that's really all I'm doing through the whole process, is if I'm entertained. Because if I'm not entertained, that's writer's block. So how am I going to entertain myself? And I'll jump to that next thing that entertains me and then reverse engineer from that and get through whatever it is until the draft is done.
Okay.
And then for this book, I was writing, and I did this with my last book too, kind of a story within a story. So you're getting what happened in 1932 in those chapters that are interspersed. And I titled it Fable because it's not necessarily all reality or all truth or based in fact. It's somebody's version of what happened then.
And Robert, I was curious if you set out from the beginning to have the ending, not necessarily the reveal, but the cicadas and the crunch and the goo and they're all over everything. There is crunching and goo.
There is a lot of crunching in it.
I mean, I felt like I was there, but I didn't. I guess we've heard how these two kind of came about. Which parts did you know ahead of time were going to happen, and which parts came to you as you were writing?
Well, there were these things that I kept hearing, and I didn't know what they meant, and I didn't know who was going to say them. I think one of the things was some things in this world are meant to burn, and this world's a dangerous place for a beautiful thing. And that sort of kicked off the book in a way. Hey, who's saying this? What's going to happen? I had a sense of the beginning, the middle, and the end. I have a friend, another writer friend of mine. He calls those things that you really love writing candy bar scenes. And so there was this event that occurs, and I think it happens over 3 chapters. It's the Mayfield Gala, and I was so excited. And it happens in the second act, and I found myself writing toward that moment. Again, I knew the beginning, the middle, and the end. But for me, I think part of the excitement of writing is not knowing everything that's going to happen. And that beginning and that middle and that end really are guideposts. And you don't want to veer from those guideposts, but I wanted to be very open-minded. And I know it sounds woo-woo, but and maybe a bit trite, but the characters will let you know what it is they want to do. And so that's part of the exciting process for me, not knowing everything that's going to happen. I knew that the very ending would be something along the lines of to where all the bad runs deep, and I knew that it would end in fire. But I wasn't quite sure what would all the things that would happen that would lead up to that moment.
What you have, all of y'all have, characters of other races. You have black characters in your books, but Robert, the black characters are more prominent in your book. What care did you take in creating characters that are not like you?
I was very, so writing it, I knew, well, first of all, I think you set out to love and respect all of your characters except for Miss Minnie Jane, the church organist.
I love her.
It was very, there's a huge responsibility, I think, in writing any character, but writing someone outside of your frame of reference can be extremely challenging. I think creative people, if they go into it with respect, can, and with love and compassion and care, and that I think that, you can pull that off. I was very worried before the book came out that maybe I had not gotten them right. And you're referencing Miss Wessie and young Etta Mae, who's a 10-year-old black girl. There's something extraordinary about the women in this book. Young Annalise can taste and see music. She's a piano prodigy. Etta Mae possesses, the young 10-year-old black girl possesses this amazing singing voice. Operatically, you classify it as her being a coloratura soprano. And Annalise suspects that young Etta Mae can manipulate other people's emotions in the natural world around her with her music. So I wanted to set that stage where, regardless of what race you were, you had something remarkable about you. It was very stressful. I was worried, and I think the individuals that you represent in your book. You want to have other readers and other writers who represent that frame of reference to review your book and let you know in advance whether or not you got it right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Did I answer it?
You did.
Okay.
You did. You did.
You did, and you went first. That was impressive. I think it's like writing anything about history. I'm making it up, and I am not an authority, and I know I'm going to get it wrong. So you do your best. You are respectful and diligent about what you're doing, and you know that you're not an authority. You go to somebody who is, and you say, where am I getting this wrong? Help me make sure that I am being respectful with this. Personally, I have an invisible disability. So there are things about me that you don't know. Guess what? Everybody in this room, there are things I don't know about you. If the thing that makes you somebody who's on the fringe is because of something that can be seen, I have to imagine that. Because I walk through the world with this thing that you can't see, right? And I know it and you don't. So the way I looked at this book and these characters, I grew up as a little white girl in the 80s. I knew very little I grew up in North Georgia. Like, everybody's white with me where I grew up in southern Appalachia. So it's almost a fiction to me, what I learned historically about what was going on around me. And like even during my mother and my father and my grandparents' time, their stories are what I know. I can remember going to our library. It's one of my favorite places because we had no air conditioning, and they had air conditioning at the library. And it was a big old house, and there was a staircase, and I wanted to go upstairs, and I could not. And I remember my mother, I pitched a fit. I was 3 or 4 years old. And she explained to me, I remember her saying to me, like 4 years old, I remember this, there were people who couldn't even come in here when I was growing up. You should be glad you're here. So that's like the first inkling I had of that. I remember wondering who they were, and why could you not get into the library, and what would I do if I couldn't get into the library? What would I do if I couldn't get into the library? And that informed this book, and that was my reaction. I wanted my white characters in this book, because it's 1959, to start to look around and go, like I did at 4 or 5 years old. Like I did when I went to the theater and I couldn't go in the balcony because it was closed, and my grandmother explained to me why. And then so all of my main characters are white people like me who are hopefully looking around going, wait a second, just because it's always been this way, wait a minute. And they're hiding their own things too. And then I have a man who is Cherokee who fights in the Korean War, who comes to live in this little small town, and his friend Rosie Devane, who's a soldier with him. They've been fighting an integrated troop, and when they show up, Rosie says, they come back to the States, he says, you come work for me. We'll buy this theater together. We'll work together. It'll be great. Rosie has a rosy perspective on what's going to happen here, and it doesn't go the way he thinks. I have a black kid that drowns at the beginning, Loomis Gray, and he's friends with Cleo Woodbine, who can't be friends with him in the way that she would like, even in 1932, and in 1959 is still haunted by him. And what actually happens to him, you find out later, is it's all very complicated, but you're looking at these characters through the eyes of a white character, because that's my perspective. That's what I know and can write about and get wrong on the page and try and learn something from. That's the only way I know to do it.
And your characters who can't go to the library have a really elegant solution. It's not a spoiler. It's just a little sprinkle that you'll have to read it to find out. But an elegant solution.
And I wanted
that.
when you have your main characters are all white and you have these social issues, I didn't want them to have these premeditated decisions that they were making about right and wrong and justice. And I wanted them to suddenly be in a moment and maybe do the right thing accidentally, maybe do the wrong thing accidentally. I wanted it to be life. I didn't want everybody saving one another. I didn't want everybody making miracles or proclamations. I just wanted them stumbling through so that you could reflect on that as a reader and I could reflect on that as the writer. What would I do?
Well, I'll say very quickly, because I think we're about out of time. I saw the 5-minute thing about 5 minutes ago. My character, the main character who is black in my story is named Letitia, and Letitia is a girl of Memory's age, and Memory really likes her a lot. She works in the gallery that Mac McFadden owns. But Letitia is the smartest human, in the book. She is smart. She has Tony's number right off the bat. She ends up being a physicist. Mac McFadden was a physicist before he became a gallery owner, and he takes her, he mentors her, he teaches her things that she could not learn in a segregated school, and he mentors her, and she becomes a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab. 1 minute. Okay.
Did it.
I had about 19 other questions to ask you, but I have to say, dream panel. Y'all had plenty to say. I love it when people have stuff to say about their books. Since we have about 45 seconds at this point, did anyone have a really quick question they were dying to ask? Yes.
I would just like to tell Kimberly, a number of years ago, myself and some fellow members of the Louisiana Hiking Club went to Cumberland Island. It's a gorgeous place, it's beautiful, it's fascinating, and one thing that makes it so is there's no bridge to Cumberland Island. You got to catch the ferry boat.
Yep.
And it is just a beautiful island, and it's got a lot of natural beauty left. Some of the fascinating things about it, JFK Jr. had his wedding there.
I know.
Because he did not want to have the paparazzi. And I think he was successful. And Light Horse Harry Lee was buried there originally. That's Robert E. Lee's father, but I think Virginia dug him up and
They moved him. They moved him. And Dungeness Mansion is the second Dungeness to stand on that spot. The first one was actually when the Carnegies bought it. They bought it from a cousin of Jefferson Davis. You cannot make this crap up.
Why did you choose Cumberland?
Well, because it feels like, it doesn't feel real. You feel like you're out of time, right? And I was trying to write a story about ghost stories. And it felt very haunted to me. It's got a long, long history.
Did you see one of the wild herds of
Oh, yeah.
over there?
I did.
Yeah.
One of the things that strikes me about all of our work is it is so southern in that it is so located in place.
Yeah.
Place.
Well, thank you so much for everyone for coming to this panel. Thank y'all for being
Thank you.
amazing panelists.
You're awake this early. Thank you.
And they will be signing their books, which you should all buy, at 11. So you better get over there.
We seen you. We know who you are.
Yes.
If you don't come.